Greetings to you all, and thank you for standing by. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar, Patient Intelligence, Applying Advanced Analytics to Patient Personas. My name is Al Salchunas, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. I'm sorry. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that. Before we get to the presentation, I do have a few housekeeping items. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode, so no need to put your ringer on silent. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website by next week. Although lines are muted, we do encourage you to ask questions during today's presentation. Please submit any questions using the questions window located on the right side of your screen. Type your question into the box, click send, and they will be sent directly to a meeting organizer to queue for the Q&A session we will host at the end of the webinar. Should you encounter any technical difficulties during the webinar, please also utilize the questions window to describe your issue, and one of our support staff will follow up with you to troubleshoot. Within the webinar, we will also have a few polling questions to gather your input. When we reach those points, I'll read off the question and you'll be able to select from a list of options. I'm happy to introduce our speakers today. John Peliuca, CO's Vice President of Life Sciences, leads the global commercialization efforts of CO's advanced analytics and software as a service solutions within the life science market. He has nearly 20 years of sales, marketing, and technology experience in quantitative analytics and software solutions for life sciences. Mark Feeney is a life sciences consultant at CO. He holds a master's degree from Binghamton University and has spent 20 years in the life sciences industry. Mark's areas of specialty include project and operations management for commercial effectiveness and patient analytics applications, including HCP targeting, patient segmentation and longitudinal analysis, Salesforce restructuring, KOL identification, physician influence analysis, and multi-channel marketing analysis. Before we start the presentation, I'd like for you to answer the following polling question. Where does your company stand in terms of patient intelligence? Very comprehensive. We have bits and pieces. We have a plan waiting to be implemented, or we're way behind. Venkat, are you launching the poll?
Yes, Al, we have launched it and I've displayed the results here.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like we have the results of the survey. It looks like everyone is way behind. That's been 100% of the response, and interesting amount of votes. Thank you. And now, please welcome John Peliuca and Mark Feeney. John, please take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the time this morning. I know everyone is extremely busy these days as we enter fourth quarter, but I appreciate you listening in on our brief seminar around patient personas and patient intelligence. What we're going to do is spend a little bit of time today. When we think about patient intelligence, there's a number of petals, if you will. If you look at this as a sunflower, think of petals or ways in which personas can be utilized in the healthcare setting, specifically life sciences, pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device-based companies. We could see here risk and impactability, obviously personas, patient intelligence around persona, treatment journey, segmentation, undiagnosed, identifying undiagnosed patients, non-adherence, understanding the non-adherence questions that arise every day, outcomes, how does patient intelligence drive or contribute to outcomes, and then of course cost of care. What we will do is for today, given that we have limited time, we're going to spend some time on the 4 blue petals, take a little bit of a deep dive into some of the information between each of these petals, how we as an organization see this unfolding in the market, how our clients have been utilizing this type of information, and then of course have an open session for Q&A. So with that being said, I'm going to dive into the first slide, risk and impactability scores. So when we think about risk or prospective risk and impactability, they are 2 valuable metrics in today's world in the healthcare universe of understanding the patient from the next 12 months perspective, or understanding the patient population, and understand essentially what will drive the patient population. So if I start on the left and think about prospective risk, risk means a lot to a lot of people. Obviously, in our world, in pharma and biotech, it means one thing. On the other side of the equation, for the payers, PBMs, health systems, it means something else. But to the everyday common man, risk means a lot of things. So I always like to spend some time defining what risk means in multiple ways, but especially what it means to us. Again, some folks look at risk and think that it's a board game. For those folks out there that know that the age-old game of risk, strategy, conflict, and conquest, not what we're talking about, obviously. But if you really look up the definition of risk, it's defined as the chance that an investment will lose value over time. And I think it's a great definition. It has multiple definitions, but I think that is something everyone should think about, because when we think of risk and we look at risk and we measure risk, it is the chance of an investment, your own health, losing value over time, becoming less healthy. And hence, a number of factors can play into what that means, meaning comorbid conditions, increased costs, out-of-pocket costs, treatments to the doctors, and possible shortened lifespan. So when we think about prospective risk, we're looking at and we're measuring the next 12 months, and we're looking at a patient population in a given condition. And what we want to do is we want to put a number or a score on where is that patient population headed from a risk perspective. So is their health predicted to increase over time, decrease over time, or remain as is? And then how do we then further quantify that? We think about what type of medical services are these patients or consumers expected to use in that 12-month time frame. Now, obviously, we're using valuable de-identified medical pharmacy claims eligibility data, socioeconomic and demographic data, very granular, pristine data that can go back 5 years plus, and looking at patients based on condition types and all other comorbid condition types. And we can measure and look at the fact of what services have been used along the way, medical services, inpatient, outpatient, etc. What medication they've been taking naturally, have they been consistent in taking that medication over time, and try to identify the underlying reasons as to why or why not. That to us is risk or prospective risk, valuable, and a valuable metric now that we're seeing unfold within the pharma business for multiple reasons. It could be used based on identifying at-risk populations for value-based contracting, at least from a level setting perspective with payers. It can be used on the commercial side for with brand teams, I should say, on understanding the risk of a patient population being non-compliant with diabetes medication, and then providing valuable insight and information to the providers or the HCPs that treat those patients. Obviously, it could also be used for digital, non-digital type messaging at the patient level or DTC campaigns. There's a multitude of ways in which it could be used, but it's valuable, very granular information. And some of the technicalities of how this works, when we think about risk, everybody is scored at, 1 is the average, and that is and again, that's quantified into dollars, but 1 could mean that the average patient population costs $1,000 per year. Well, anything above that increases your risk score, therefore increases your costs and out-of-pocket costs for the patient, and also for the insurance company, but also contributes to a lowering of your overall health. And that's really what we're trying to assess with this prospective risk score across the U.S. population. The next component of that, and it's an important metric. I mean, nobody would disagree or argue it, but I'd argue that the next score combined with risk is more invaluable, impactability. And impactability is really starting to get into understanding patients at risk, where care management interventions are most likely to be successful. So, why do patients act the way they do? For example, are they non-compliant with the medication? Well, there's going to be a number of reasons across a number of segments of persona types as to why they are non-compliant with their medication. It could be due to comorbid conditions. It could be socioeconomic factors. It could be other. It could be lifestyle factors. Could be age. Could be thought process on how do they approach care. It could be the way they think and utilize inpatient ER visits. It could be a number of factors involved in all of that. The key is stratifying that into a score, mapping that, and understanding if a patient is at high risk for their health decreasing over time, therefore their risk score increasing. Are they potentially impactable? And what do those underlying message possibly look like? Why is it valuable? It's valuable in a couple of ways. When our clients are having conversations, negotiating, if you will, with payers around value-based care contracts, the question becomes, well, how do we think about the population and start to tackle the, for lack of a better word, low-hanging fruit, those folks that have the highest impactability and the highest risk score? Because even a 1/10 of a point movement with some of those folks could translate into significantly better health, lower overall cost, healthier patient, and a track or a pathway toward better lifestyle down the road. And that's essentially what we're all aiming for. So when we think about prospective risk and impactability scoring, we see it as a foundation to driving better health and better outcomes, which I'll talk about in just a little bit after Mark covers a few other topics. But we see this as the foundation, and we also see this as the grounding conversation that can happen between pharma and their customers, meaning payers, providers, health systems, PBM, etc. But that is a grounding that everyone could usually agree upon. Risk, impactability, secondary question thereafter, how do we then tackle that patient population? What are the appropriate metrics to look at from a measurement of success perspective? So I'll talk about that briefly in a moment. But with that being said, I'm going to jump off this page. I'm going to allow my colleague, Mark, to jump into a couple of other details of patient intelligence, and then I'll come back to outcomes in a moment.
Thanks, John. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce Mark Feeney, and he'll take us down the path of the treatment journey.
Thanks, Alan. John. Pleasure to be here this morning and talk to all you folks about some exciting topics on patient intelligence. On this segment, we'll be taking a look at the patient treatment journey analysis. Understanding the patient journey is increasingly becoming an important layer of insights to pharmaceutical companies. Patient treatment journey or line of therapy is an in-depth longitudinal analysis of patient-level claims, and these are both medical and pharmacy claims, to uncover the therapies involved in the treatment of a specific medical condition. So why are patient journey analyses becoming so important? Well, and quite often in various therapeutic areas, there are many treatment methods available. These methods may typically follow published treatment guidelines, but this is not always the case. For example, in type 2 diabetes, the guidelines typically state the use of biglinides, such as metformins, as the first medicines doctors prescribe for type 2 diabetes. In our research and experience within the diabetes market, this is most often true, but there are certainly exceptions, such as the use of insulin, sulfonylureas, and TZDs in line 1. But then what about line 2 and beyond? This is where we find it becoming more complex, where many other treatments, such as GLP-1s, DPP-4s, and SGLT2s are being used, not only alone, but perhaps in combination. Therefore, knowing where your product falls within the line of therapy, and then being able to identify the patient profile of your product by line can be a very valuable insight. Perhaps providing the ability to move your product up within the treatment journey, say from line 3 to line 2 or line 2 to 1, perhaps. So a patient journey involves the analysis of patient claims over time. And we usually review 4 to 6 years of historical data in order to determine the treatments involved in each line of therapy. And there are certainly specific business rules that we employ that determine when a line starts and when a line ends. And certainly this is based on the specific medical condition and the number of products involved within that diagnosis. And once a line of therapy has been defined, several metrics can then be calculated for each line of therapy, including the following. First of all, we take a look at just the number of patients on each treatment. So this defines the patient volume by line, which helps us to understand the number of patients being treated by line and by associated regimens. The patient profile, such as clinical age, gender, socioeconomic, demographic information, etc. This is a pretty vital and important set of metrics that allows us to gain a better understanding of the patient profile, or personas, as John just talked about. We may uncover that there are vastly different profile types by line, and within a line, by treatment regimen. For example, patients within line 1 treated with a metformin may have vastly different attributes than those being treated with insulin. Median time is another metric that we calculate, and this provides valuable insights on how often patients may stay on a particular line and within a line by regimen. And we often see this time varies greatly. With the cost of care, utilization of medical services, and comorbid conditions, we start to gain an understanding of the clinical and financial outcomes for the patient within each line. And we certainly see differences in outcomes by line and within each line by treatment regimen. By analyzing this information further, we can begin to define patient waterfalls or individual patient cohorts that may be well suited to a pharma company's product. For example, patients within a certain age bucket, geographic location, whether or not on a commercial or Medicare plan, that have switched treatment from product A to product B. Identifying these highly targeted patient segments can be an extremely valuable set of insights. Alan, if you can go on to the next slide, please. Thanks, Al. Continuing on with the patient journey, this slide displays 2 patient treatment journey graphics. The top image displays a high-level summary of a journey for a diagnosis, in this case, type 2 diabetes. And of course, any analysis that we do in treatment journey certainly will differ from therapeutic area to therapeutic area, but this is an example for type 2. We then see that there are multiple lines, with subsequent lines having multiple treatments or regimens. You see this quite often in therapy, of course, where a single treatment is initially started and then other treatments are added on. And eventually there's a switch in treatments, which starts a new line of therapy. And this can continue for multiple lines of therapy over many, many years. For complex disease areas with the multiple treatments, this can be a complicated process to understand. But with the aid of this type of analysis, the picture becomes much clearer. The bottom image displays a more detailed view of a patient journey analysis. We see here that over a journey of 5 years, there are dozens of treatment combinations occurring. Each line displays a treatment regimen. So on the left, we can see where the initial treatment started. And on the right-hand side, we can see kind of the current treatments. But in between, there are many, many lines occurring and many, many regimens occurring as well. The thickness of each line represents the number of patients on that regimen. So we see some lines that are pretty thick and some lines that are pretty thin. And as we move from the initial treatment within line 1 to the current line of therapy towards the end, we can see a major change in the treatment patterns. In summary, gaining a better understanding of the treatment journey provides valuable insights and enables targeting and engaging with the optimal patient segments that you can impact the most, thus driving brand adherence. Thanks, Al. That's it for treatment journey. And we're going to jump right into Undiagnosed. Again, this is Mark here, and I'll bring us through the Undiagnosed segment. On this segment, we'll be taking a look at the undiagnosed patient analysis. Like patient journey, undiagnosed patient identification is becoming an important tool that can be leveraged by pharmaceutical companies for uncovering critical patient intelligence. Before we dive deeper into how we do the undiagnosed, I thought it'd be a good idea to review a few therapeutic areas where we see a large section of the patient population undiagnosed. Within atrial fibrillation, or AF, one recent study has shown that the total AF prevalence in 2009 was 5.3 million people, of which 0.7 million, or 700,000 people, or 13.1% of AF cases, were undiagnosed. Over half of the model population with AF was at moderate to high risk of stroke. Within diabetes, I'm sure as we all know, it's a much larger population. The 2017 National Diabetes Statistics Report by the CDC finds that as of 2015, 30.3 million Americans, or 9.4% of the US population, had diabetes. Of the 30 million, 7.2 million people were undiagnosed. This represents about 24% of the total diabetes population. Another study within chronic kidney disease shows that CKD remains largely undiagnosed in nearly half of patients with type 2 diabetes. This new retrospective observational study showed that 49% of patients with type 2 diabetes and a lab-confirmed chronic kidney disease did not have a CKD diagnosis from their doctor in a claims database. And finally, for hypertension, Of the 75 million Americans who have hypertension, almost half do not have the condition under control. And about 11 million people, that represent about 15%, are not diagnosed, meaning they do not know their blood pressure is too high, are not receiving treatment to control it, and even though perhaps most of these individuals have health insurance or are visiting a healthcare provider each year. As we can see by these statistics, undiagnosed patients means potentially millions of people with uncontrolled conditions are seen by clinicians but remain undiagnosed. While following best practices and providing the highest levels of care, providers can still have patients hiding in plain sight who are at risk or have undiagnosed conditions. Finding these patients and spreading the word about how other healthcare professionals can find them may help save lives. So how do we go about an analysis to find undiagnosed patients? Again, it's an historical review of medical and pharmacy claims data, much like treatment journey. But in this case, we're trying to predict the probability that a patient has a condition yet is undiagnosed. This involves several steps, including identifying the appropriate population. This is where we look at all patients that have a specific disease, such as diabetes or chronic kidney disease. Creating the predictive variables. Here we look at what data is available, what individual attributes within that data to analyze. Selecting appropriate algorithms and developing the models. Obviously, this is the crucial step. And depending on the business context, we might, in some cases, restrict ourselves to a single algorithm, such as linear regression, which is quite often used. But in other cases, we might use nonlinear, such as machine learning algorithms, like vector machines, random forest, gradient boosting machines, and neural networks. And in recent times, there have been advancements that have created techniques which extract the rationale behind these black box-like machine learning predictions. And also in some cases, we build separate models and we can combine them together. So we could use multiple models from linear, from neural networks, from other machine learnings, and combine their predictions, which is called ensembling. This technique can help us in getting better predictions by overcoming the limitations of just individual algorithms. And then as part of the process, we fine-tune the different parameters of the algorithm to get the final model. But that's just the beginning. We certainly have to run through validation process, which is a critical step. Here we look at accuracy and we look at many of the outputs of the models, such as sensitivity and specificity and area under the curve and so forth, to see how well the model is performing. And we also we would split the data we want to build on the model on as training data versus testing data, such as a 70-30 or an 80-20 split. And this is where we develop the model on the trained data and then assess its performance on the test data. Also, if we have enough data, we perform what's called an out-of-time validation on a future time period. So, for example, we develop the models on specific years, for example, 2014 to 2017, and then we validate the model on 2018 year data. And then finally, as part of the entire process, certainly we need to generate the summary and insights. So this may include aggregating the undiagnosed patients to some higher level, such as actual healthcare providers or geographies, including metropolitan areas or other defined locations. And then certainly we can segment those undiagnosed patients based on the different persona types as well. In summary, based on recent studies, there's definitely a large percentage of the population that may be undiagnosed for certain conditions. Identifying these individuals can help pharmaceutical companies provide valuable treatments, which in turn can improve the health care of many people. Thanks, Al. Back to you.
Thanks, Mark. At this time, I'd invite the audience to answer polling question number 2. What two components of patient intelligence are the most valuable to you? Diagnosis and treatment histories and journeys, their socioeconomic status, risk and impactability scores, cost of care, or patient behaviors. Again, you can vote for two of these 5 potential options. Please cast your vote.
Al, I'm sharing the results. Yeah.
Yep, thank you. I'm seeing the results on the screen, but I will read the results for you. The 2 primary components of patient intelligence, as voted on by the participants in this webinar, is the diagnosis and treatment histories and journeys of patients and patient behaviors. Those were the top 2 that received votes. As a matter of fact, the other 3 did not receive any votes during the webinar. So, John, Mark, any surprises regarding these results of points A and E being the top vote getters?
This is John. I'd say I'm not surprised. I do think that socioeconomic risk and impactability and cost of care are valuable, but I also think that when you think about a patient diagnosis and treatment journey, what is part of that equation is in fact the cost of care and the risk impactability scores. It's what comes out of that. And when you combine that with patient behaviors, new sets of data that are available today to a lot of the marketplace, attitude and behavior-based data, why patients act the way they do when they are not on the clock, not in the office, not at the doctor's office, on the weekends, do environmental factors play a role? It becomes extremely valuable, and it's something that we haven't had a lot of visibility on over the years. So I can see that. I'm not surprised by what we see here.
Okay. We go back to our little sunflower petals. John, I ask you to rejoin us now and take us through the patient outcome segment of this presentation.
Thanks, Al. Yeah, so when we think about outcomes, outcomes again mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. But the reality is that outcomes in our world really mean, one of 2 things, and one being a better, healthier patient, which lead to a better lifestyle, which furthermore lead to, in my opinion, better adherence. And so, that does become sort of an attitude type of behavior change for a lot of folks, if you can understand the underlying reasons why. But at the end of the day, outcomes can be comparing based on diagnosis, treatment, line of therapy, socioeconomic, and demographic attributes. If you think of all of those insights at the patient level, they can be modeled to come up with a way to think about what positive outcomes you're trying to attain. And then furthermore, what type of clinical socioeconomic metrics we're trying to attain amongst a payer and a life sciences client. We can look at comorbid conditions. We think about comorbid conditions, we think about chronic conditions, of course. It consumes vast amounts of healthcare dollars today, also consumes vast amounts of patients in the healthcare system today. And often they go uncontrolled, and for various reasons. So to be able to think about outcomes as a positive effect on those conditions is valuable, and or truly understanding how those conditions play an adverse effect on the outcome of the patient, and then thinking about how that can be, how a care program, a digital messaging campaign, some way to touch the patient can benefit and reverse that adverse thought process toward care, if you will, for those comorbid conditions. When one of the things that we as an organization pride ourselves on is the ability to create valuable, predictive, patient-level insights that are useful in the deciding factors of outcomes, and useful in the deciding factors of how to speak to patient populations. When we get into the next level conversation, and I'm speaking of our clients, pharma, furthermore, managed market strategy types, talking to payers, self-insureds, health systems, and thinking about how to structure and value-based contracting. There's a number of ways in which outcomes can be measured. Now, obviously, we're looking at a couple of 7 or 8 service types here, which could be valuable. It could be a collection of service types. It could be a collection of open care gaps that are identified within the patient population that could be closed in various ways. It could be as simple as inpatient visits, more frequently A1C tests, for example, for diabetes patients. But the real key understanding is the reasons why those things aren't happening, and stratifying the universe around that, and then driving toward what type of outcomes that you can expect from those stratified patient populations. There's no one answer. There's a number of answers, and it can be codified into a couple of metrics. Ultimately, conversations evolve into risk, impactability, understanding the undiagnosed universe, because they could be a valuable factor in cost of care and understanding that patient journey, but also driving toward an age-old metric on the payer side, your counterparts. That's the PMPM, per member per month costs, per member per annual costs. Which is where a health plan, health system, where they're measuring the cost of dollars of their members, and how do we then, understand what those look like and how those can be bettered over time, with the appropriate messaging, with the appropriate metrics, with the appropriate care programs. So it is a complicated process. I don't think anyone would disagree. It's out there today. A number of clients under the COEXL umbrella are utilizing these analytics to help drive the insights around those discussions. And I think it will be a matter of time that we'll start to see a positive change in the health of a specific patient population, which can then be modeled in other conditions. And again, it won't be one-for-one identical. Different patients respond in different ways. They act in different ways. Various care gaps will exist for different conditions for various underlying reasons, which therefore mean that healthcare services can be measured in different ways for optimal results. Now, the one factor that is not listed here are the fact that today there are a number of data sets or apps, care service apps, if you will, available, digital type apps available that in a good way, a number of payers are embracing, that allow for the streaming of digital specific messages to persona types, and understanding, and it's also capturing the movement, if you will, of those patients and what they do and how they respond to specific messaging, and what they do about it. So it's an ability to push reminders, insights, better care information, if you will, about your condition or condition around those like you, but then also have that information anonymously shared back to the payer, and then furthermore to our clients, the life science clients, that can then understand sort of that attitude and behavior aspect of the patient population. It's valuable, becomes another layer of information that could be used. And then as thinking about outcomes-based or value-based contracting, it's an evolving process. You know, it starts in year one with specific measurements, but the measurements need to be understood that those can be tweaked over time. And they may be tweaked in month 8, for example, or month 12, and then a new set of variables will then be measured. Ultimate goal naturally is to see a specific segment of the population's risk score and risk score decrease, using this type of logic and information. So I'm going to stop there. We can talk for days about outcomes. I'm sure you've all heard it all before. There's a lot of different ways to approach this, but we are tracking down a very intriguing and interesting path over the last 4 years with our clients. Very positive results thus far, and it's a level setting. It really is on how we standardize what risk means to organizations, how we standardize what impactability means, with the key benefit of driving better outcomes for patients ultimately, and of course driving down costs while driving up adherence, which is the holy grail, as I've been told multiple times. So I'm going to stop there. I think we have another poll to share with the audience.
Thanks, John. Truly appreciate your insight as well as Mark's. And you're right, we do have another poll to ask the polling question. How do or would you use patient intelligence? Address the patient non-adherence crisis, better understand the patient treatment journey, quantify the cost of care by patient segment, monitor outcomes to prove product value, or all of the above? Please cast your vote. Well, from the votes I see, it's unanimous. Really, all of the above. Those key applications and how patient intelligence is used to address those 4 answers. Mark, John, any comments regarding the polling results? Any surprises?
Hey, this is Mark Gallo. Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. In speaking with our clients on a daily basis, these are certainly the kind of the top 4, if you will, the types of patient's intelligence that we see our clients, really needing information on. So, yeah, not surprised. It's all of the above there. It's actually good to see that people need help in these areas.
Okay, thanks for your input. Okay, so we will now be entering our question and answer session. Again, as a quick reminder, please submit your questions using the questions window located on the right side of your screen. And I do have a question that's been submitted. Can CO leverage our proprietary patient data to augment its patient analytics capabilities and findings? I'll leave that open to the both of you, John and Mark.
Hey, Alex, Mark.
No, go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if I can understand the question correctly, is it meaning can we digest or take client data and merge that with our proprietary claims data? If I understand that correctly, absolutely, and we do that quite often. Whether it's clients, patient level data or provider level data, or also in some cases we digest their patient registry data as well. CO is a HIPAA compliant organization, so we are able to digest, patient level identified information as part of our analysis. So, we quite often not only use our internal patient level medical claims data, but do take, various data sources and files from our clients to augment, our analysis as well.
I think,
Excellent. Thank
John,
you.
I think another way to answer that question, if in this context, for a number of clients here in life sciences, of course, but then also on the other side, on the payer side, which is a whole different line of business inside of the organization, we do in fact represent an extension or a piece of their internal advanced analytic teams. So therefore, they may have a very good process of developing 3/4 of a risk model, and we represent the final 25% of that model through augmentation of our data plus data scientists, or more likely within the pharma business, in our world, building the risk and impactability model is not a core capability of most analytical teams. So we do then become an outsourced extension of that team in helping develop that for them as an internal capability, and then of course driving and updating that as needed, and then at some point where it becomes an internal model, if you will, or where it could be handed off and we are providing more data-based insights versus analytic-based insights. So worth sharing.
Thanks, John. There was one other question that was received. How have your clients benefited from the patient intelligence that you have provided them? Can you give a couple of examples of the benefits that clients have received from this analysis?
Sure. This is John. Just a couple of high-level ones worth mentioning. And again, I think to level set all the functional areas that these type of insights become extremely valuable are managed markets, the strategy side, who are dealing with payers, self-insured PBMs, health systems, and then also the commercial brand side of the business. So a little bit of an example on both. And I would say that because the data can be used creatively on both sides, with managed markets teams, we have been doing analysis to understand or ingesting data to understand the risk stratified member of a particular population, to align or level set the organizations on who are the most at-risk patients within that particular plan, and what are their impactability scores. That then segues into the thought process of a risk-bearing or value-based contract. Instead of trying to boil it down to address a 500,000 member population around diabetes, it becomes a bite-sized chunk of patients initially, for starters, of maybe 50,000 or 25,000 or 100,000 patients. We know exactly where they are. We know what they look like. We know exactly how to approach those based on the model. We know exactly what the demographics of those patients are, clinical and socioeconomic. They can, at that point, evenly level assess, who they want to tackle and how they want to then measure success against that particular population. So that is a win. Beyond that, we're not exactly privy to all of the metrics and all of the insights and programs that are being used. They're not part of that process. We are the engine that drives that data for them. So that's one way that a number of clients are using it today with their partners. On the commercial side, brand side, there's a wide range of ways in which they are using the data at the patient level and then rolling that up to the provider level against their targeted universe, and then understanding how to then better message through branded campaigns to the providers around a specific patient population. Why do they act the way they do? How do they act the way they do? And what is a generic profile of these persona types, so that the next time a patient shows up in the office and presents a similar characteristic of that persona, here are the 2 or 3 top messages that can be revealed to that patient specific to their health. So that's another way. There's other ways, DTC campaigns, digital, non-digital messaging types that are being used on the brand side as well. And then last extension of that too, a couple of clients have used it on the commercial operations side when they are valuing specific areas and regions or territories from a targeting perspective. They feel that this becomes another lever of value, in terms of, are there highly impactable patients in these particular areas by being treated by providers that are targets of our, within our universe? If that's the case, they might get a slight bump up in value, and therefore, more sort of receptivity to messaging and whatever sales or account type messages the pharma client would like. We have a couple of different ways that can be disseminated through partnerships with Viva or just a process of moving data back and forth within our organizations and their organization. But there's a lot of ways in which the data can be used that we've seen in a very positive way.
Thanks, John. And thank you, Mark, for your insights. I'd also like to thank the audience for taking the time to join us today. If you'd like someone from CO to contact you about what you've seen today, please visit the Contact Us page on our website. As a reminder, today's session was recorded and will be sent along to you in the coming days. And feel free to share it with your colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation and have a wonderful day.